Hello, government students. Today we're going to be looking at the legislative branch a little bit more, and specifically, we're going to be looking at how Congress goes about getting its work done. I'm starting off this presentation with a picture here of the senior senator from Illinois, Richard Durbin. One of Richard Durbin's proud accomplishments, I suspect if you would ask him, was sponsoring legislation that brought free meals to underprivileged children in schools. And here you see our senator at one of these inner city schools talking with the kids and the teachers who have benefited from the program that he sponsored in Congress. So today we're going to be looking at the kinds of systems that are in place in Congress that helped Durbin and other people in Congress to do what they do on a daily basis. So let's go ahead and get started. First, I want us to take a peek at the main duties of members of Congress, and this would apply to both senators and members of the House of Representatives. And first and foremost, of course, is lawmaking, the legislative duties that Congress has. And that's what we really think of most of the time when we think of what Congress does, lawmaking. But there's also another very important element to the job of a congressman, and that's casework. Casework involves a couple of things. It involves something we call constituent services. You and I are the constituents of our representatives in Washington. And if a constituent asks for help from a member of Congress, that would be called constituent services. And what might that entail? Well, for example, in a couple of years, your government teacher will be receiving Social Security. And let's say that my Social Security check for some reason doesn't arrive, and maybe there's some holdup within the federal bureaucracy that has caused me not to receive the check that I need to feed myself. Well, I might contact a member of Congress and explain I'm having trouble dealing with the Social Security bureaucracy. Can you help me out here? I need my Social Security check. That would be an example of constituent services. The congressman would get one of his staffers to dig into the problem and see what he could do to help me out. Another example would be things like public works or other types of activities that aren't directed to a specific individual, but to the district as a whole. So by public works, we're typically talking about infrastructure type projects, things like building roads or repairing bridges, that sort of thing. It might involve building or repairing a dam. There's a dam here in downtown Rockford, just south of downtown Rockford, which I believe is scheduled for a major public works project to update the dam and make sure that it is a sound structure. That would be an example of public works. You may have also seen the bridge that crosses the Rock River at Morgan Street, which is south of downtown. Beautiful bridge. That was built about 10 years or so ago. Again, that was an example of public works funded by the federal government, and it was a much needed improvement on transportation in our city. And then you also have things like the contracts, federal contracts, disaster relief, that sort of stuff, again, which the congressman will help to get for his home district. Let's look at some of the behind the scenes structures that exist that help congressmen do these duties. First of all, each congressman, whether you're talking the House of Representatives or the Senate, has a personal staff. And that would include having an office in Washington, D.C., and at least one in the home district. Here in Northern Illinois, we have two people serving us in the House of Representatives. Their districts are rather large. One of the districts extends from the western half of Rockford all the way to the Quad Cities and then down to parts of Peoria. A large district like that will have multiple offices in it. The other congressman serving Northern Illinois has a district stretching from the Wisconsin border, and then it kind of circles around the Chicago metropolitan area to the border of Indiana. He too would have several offices in that district that stretches over such a wide geographic area. And the job of the staff is really just to collect information on issues that are of interest to the congressman. The staff will also deal with the media and lobbyists. A lobbyist is someone usually from either industry or some special interest group who wants to work with a congressman to propose a specific type of legislation that would be of interest to that industry or to the special interest group. And the staff helps with re-election activities. They'll, schedule campaign appearances and that sort of thing. They might work with the media again on re-election actions and that sort of thing, and with the congressman's own campaign staff coordinating activities there. And the personal staff finally includes students. An intern is a college student that will work for a congressman, and a page is typically a high school student. I will tell you right now that if you are in college and are interested in something that would look really, really good on a resume, you might look into the possibility of becoming an intern. It would be an excellent thing to have on a resume. It would be a really interesting experience for you. We have had students at our school who did intern, not necessarily for a member of Congress in Washington, D.C., but we have had students from our school be serving as interns for state legislatures. So that's a pretty cool deal. A page is a high school student, typically a junior in high school. So if you were wanting to be a page, you've probably missed your opportunity at this point. But typically someone who is a sophomore in high school could apply for a position as a page, and if you get it, it is usually 1 semester long, and you would go to high school in the basement of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and then that would be a half a day, and the other half day you would actually be working for a member of Congress in the Capitol building, most likely. It's pretty menial jobs, but it's pretty cool. Nevertheless, you might be running errands, taking notes back and forth between various Congress people, doing basically whatever the congressman asks you to do. And then we have committees in Congress. We'll get into the committees a little bit more in detail in a bit, but each committee has its own staff. A committee staff works for the committee, a committee made up of multiple members of Congress. They do not work for an individual congressman, but for the committee as a whole. And their job is to write bills, summarize bills, organize the hearings that the committee might have as they consider a bill. And then the committee staff will also negotiate and discuss things with the lobbyists. Basically, the job of the committee staff is to keep that legislation moving through the system so it doesn't stall out. They want to keep things moving, keep the system working efficiently. Let's talk a little bit more about the committee system and the types of committees that there are. First of all, you have standing committees, and when we think of committees, this is probably what most people who do think about committees would be thinking of, the standing committees. These are permanent committees, and they are subject matter specific. So you would have the Senate Agriculture Committee or the House Agriculture Committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, the Armed Services Committee, these sorts of things. They are subject specific. And typically a committee is going to have somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 members on it. There will be, the seats on the committee will be divided up according to the percentage of seats that are, Republican or Democrat in the Senate or House as a whole. You also have select committees. Select committees are temporary committees that are simply designed to complete a certain task. So right now, as I speak in the year 2022, there is a select committee in the House of Representatives that is investigating the events of January the 6th, 2021, when there were riots and an attempted insurrection basically at the United States Capitol trying to prevent the counting of the votes for president after the 2020 election. So that's an example of a select committee trying to figure out what happened and then putting together recommendations to keep it from happening again. Select committee was also formed after the terrorist attack of 9/11. Again, it was a temporary committee assigned to figure out what happened, how the terrorists were able to succeed without being found out before the event happened. And then that select committee also recommended course of action to help prevent that from happening again. There are also a few joint committees, not many, but there are a few joint committees where you have members of the House and the Senate serving on the same committee. For example, there is a joint committee that oversees the operations of the Library of Congress. So that would be an example of a joint committee. Again, there's just a few of them. And finally, a very important committee is a type of select committee, a temporary committee, and it's called a conference committee. When a bill passes both chambers of Congress, but one of the chambers maybe revised the bill a little bit and makes it look a little bit different than what the other chamber of commerce approved, you have to reconcile those differences. And you cannot pass a bill out of the Senate and a bill out of the House that aren't identical. So if one of those chambers does make some revisions to the bill that was passed by the other chamber, you have to reconcile those changes. So you'll have members of both the House and the Senate meet together in conference committee to work out those differences, come up with compromises, and then make sure that the bill is going to be the same in both the Senate version and the House version. This typically only happens on really important bills or bills that are fairly controversial in nature. Bills that may cost a whole lot of money might require a conference committee to work out a compromise, but they're fairly rare. Most bills don't need this. Most bills, the Senate or the House will pass it exactly as the other chamber passed it. Okay, let's look at some support services real quickly, and then we'll be done. There are a couple of organizations that exist to help Congress do its job. The first is the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress actually started back in the early 1800s, and the first books in the Library of Congress were the books that had been in the personal library of Thomas Jefferson. And after Thomas Jefferson retired from government service, he donated his library to Congress to help the Congress then do research on subjects which would help them do their job. And of course, the Library of Congress has grown immensely since that time. It is a huge, huge, huge collection of books. The Library of Congress extends underneath the streets of Washington, D.C., and it is the largest library in the world. Virtually any serious book that's ever been published in the United States can be accessed through the Library of Congress. There's also something called the General Accounting Office. The General Accounting Office tracks how much money has been spent on government programs. So it figures out how much things have costs that have already taken place. And then comparable to that, but not to be confused with the General Accounting Office, is the Congressional Budget Office, which predicts how much things will cost in the future. And that's necessary when we, put together a budget of programs for the United States government. We need to know how much things will likely cost. When Congress is considering a bill, they want to know how much money this activity that they're considering would likely cost. Well, that's the job of the Congressional Budget Office, to come up with a prediction of what things will cost. The Congressional Budget Office, by the way, is not political. It's highly, highly respected. It is nonpartisan, and it's a very, very respected organization that does a good job of making projections of what things will cost. Of course, it's not always accurate, because things happen that you can't predict sometimes, but it is a highly respected organization, and we're lucky to have it in our government. So with that, we're done with looking at how Congress gets things done. Be sure to check Canvas and see if there's anything for you to work on. You guys have a great day.